I have a question for you. Do you think people better understand love now in 2021 or back in the 1950s, or to be exact, 1957? That's my question. Imagine being woken up in the middle of the night, it's 4 a.m., by your great, 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 great grandfather, and he's shaking you awake because he's time traveled up to you from 1957, back from the Stone Ages, and wanted to give you love advice. Imagine that. Do you think the guidance that your great 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 grandfather would have, do you think it would be outdated? Do you think it would be too old fashioned? Do you think it would be the stupidest thing you've ever heard on planet Earth? Let me tell you the reason that I bring this up. So I was at a lady's home about a few months ago, and she'd recently moved into a nursing home, and she was selling her humble abode, and she offered that I could take literally any book that I wanted from her house. And so when I was scanning through, after I noticed that she had a book called How to Get a Man in Your 40s, which was super depressing because she was in her 90s now and she had never gotten a man, my eyes landed on another book for someone who wasn't in their 40s. This book had time traveled just like a great 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 grandfather to present day. And in a way, it was there to give me love advice. It was this book right here. All right, Facts of Life and Love for Teenagers. Not teenagers, no. Back in 1957, they were so old-fashioned that they put a hyphen between teen and agers. Yes, that is how old this thing is. So my point of this video is to ask this book, do you have anything important and relevant and maybe a little bit old-fashioned and quirky to tell us today to guide us here in 2021? It does. It has a lot to say. So here's the question. Will this book and the contents inside of it, will this book help me or will it harm me when I crack open those ancient pages and dust flies into my face when I open and read it? And more importantly, when I read what these dusty pages say, will it help or harm you? Let's find out in today's episode of Love Stories with Grady. Hola amigos, this is Grady Wyzorek, and I am a 22-year-old who has never dated a girl longer than 22 hours. And today, Miss Evelyn Millis Duvall is going to make sure that someday I can date a girl for at least 23. If you're like me and you have a thing or two that you can learn about love, well, stick around. Today is an introduction. It's an episode 1 of an ongoing saga reading through this book that is over 50 years old, over 60 years old. This book has been alive about 3 times the span of my lifetime. In the upcoming weeks and the upcoming months, you and I will be time traveling back to 1957 in order to learn a thing or two. But first, we need to get some perspective on this. 1957? I mean, how old really is that? Well, let me tell you. 1957 was 3 years before the 60s and the 70s. And the reason that is important is because back in those times, things were kind of anything goes in regards to clothing and who you were with and what you did with them when you were with them. But all I'll say is, back in the day, in the 60s and 70s, Facts of Life and Love for Teenagers and the guidance that it had for young people was likely not necessarily being read by most of the people in this revolution. And the reason I'm not saying what the revolution is called is because YouTube might flag this video, and I don't know enough about the rules of YouTube to say the word, so we're just gonna leave it off for now. 1957 was 6 years before JFK was assassinated. 1957 was 10 years before the first Super Bowl. 1957 was 11 years before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. 1957 was 12 years before a man stepped on the moon. 1957 was, if you're a math geek, was 43 years before the year 2000. 1957 was 47 years before Facebook even started. And 1957 was 64 years before this year, 2021. So since Evelyn was kind enough to time travel back from 1957 up to present day, I want to find out a little bit about Evelyn. So I went online, I did my little Google search on her, and I found out that she was born in 1906 and she died in 1998. And when I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's kind of crazy because 1998 was the year I was born. And so I'm like, that's kind of odd that she was born the same year I was. I kind of wonder what day she died. And when I looked into it, she died December 14th, 1998, which was the day before I was born. So Miss Evelyn Duvall Millis, however you say your name in whatever order that you want me to say it, I am continuing on your legacy. So yeah, that's kind of creepy that I was born the day after. There's a few different editions of this book. I have the 7th edition. You can see some images of other editions here. One of the key things about these different varieties is that they all look really old. This cover, it says what every teenager should know. It's the new revised edition, so this is hot off the press. The first edition came out in 1956, and so this is a whole year updated, way more relevant than the 1956 info. It sold for 35 cents. You probably can't see that, but I can. It originally sold for $3.50, and I believe that was because it was a hardcover. And as you can see here on the front cover, we got a love triangle going on. We got one boy, 2 girls, and they are super eager to fight over him. I can just tell. And then we see on the back who wins. It's the blonde girl who had been drinking a soda instead of the brown-haired girl who'd been drinking a milkshake. So that's very telling of where this book will go, likely, because it's saying soda, you will win the boy. Milkshake, you will not. On the back of this book, and you have to understand that this is relevant because for a wide variety of videos coming up, I'm going to be going through each chapter of this book. And it says facts of sex and growth. You're welcome, YouTube, for not saying that word. It says from New York Times. So the New York Times reviewed this book, and New York Times said, "This sane, sound, reassuring book for young people gives not only the facts of sex and growth, but also an understanding of how these facts are related to life, from etiquette to ethics. It minces no words in its descriptions of growing up and all the attendant problems of sex." The opening cover says, "This new and revised edition of a teen-age classic now presents all the facts every boy and girl should know to mature happily. From handling the physical changes of puberty to fulfilling the emotional needs of marriage, here is the frank, realistic advice of a well-known family and marriage consultant who has helped thousands of young people meet every demand of life and love." And they're, of course, talking about our dearly beloved Evelyn Millis Duvall. Rest in peace. Chicago Tribune also reviewed this book, showing how big time this thing was. They said, "Here are facts, not pat answers, to help Bob and Mary grow into well-integrated persons, knowing how to get along with themselves and with those of the opposite sex. There's information on everything from the origin of life to managing a first date properly to going steady to getting ready for marriage, all the trusty things we need to know. Sex worries, petting, parents and dates, the stages and tests of love, giving and receiving gifts and invitations, saying no on questionable issues, and avoiding love out of bounds all come in for clarification." So as you can see, it's kind of interesting because this book is handling topics that you and I still have to wrestle with and struggle with in today's day and age, but it's coming at it from a perspective of 1957. So you and I will be going through this book and figuring out, all right, what did they get right? What did they get wrong? Ultimately, different people will believe different things. For me, I actually grew up, for a lot of my life, I was like, man, what if I had been born 100 years ago? I feel like I would fit in a lot more 100 years ago than in today's era. And I don't necessarily fully believe that. I personally believe everyone is born in the right time and the right place to do the right type of things. But I did grow up thinking that. It'll be interesting for me to see if I agree with everything in this book and to see if you disagree with anything in this book as well. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be briefly commenting on my thoughts on the introduction of this book. And I want to see what your thoughts are on it too. So Evelyn says, "Some young people find that their parents are not able to discuss these questions with them." So this book is pretty much a tabloid of saying, hey, you've had this question, you've wondered this before, no one told you any of this before, we're going to answer it for you. And although I was raised with a lot of good explanations for a lot of different things, there's things that I'm sure I don't know, and there's things that I'm sure you don't know that you think you know. So Evelyn says this book covers the hush-hush topics that no one has the bravery to ask, and you and I will be forging through this path of looking at all of these hush-hush topics and tackling them. This is like the Bible of 1957. pretty much. Interestingly, and I thought you would want to know this too, Evelyn Millis Duvall, if I'm saying that name right, was very humble. In the end of her introduction, she says, "A great deal is still not understood about the way..." No, I'm not gonna do it. "A great deal is still not understood about the way people feel and behave. Human relations and behavior are just beginning to be explored as a serious area of study. What we know may be limited, but here it is for whatever help it may be to you. What is not yet known may be a challenge for your generation to discover. No frontier is more worthy of our best efforts." So, back in 1957, basically Evelyn saying, I don't got all the answers, we're just figuring some of this stuff out, so you, up in 2021, you might know better than me. And so we're going to find out, do we know better than Miss Evelyn Millis Duvall, however you say her name? So that was my brief introduction. I was originally planning on jumping right into chapter 1, but first I want to set this up, intro it, to explain, all right, what the heck is this book? Where did I get it? And why are we going to be reading it? We're going to see if the love stories that are rooted in this book are going to help our love stories in real life. I'm not necessarily looking forward to recording the next episode just because the chapter is called When Women Mature, and it answers every single question that a woman would want to know about when they are maturing from childhood into womanhood. And so that was an interesting chapter for me to read, and we will touch on it next week. Just as a sneak preview at the end of this introduction, our friend Evelyn says the first chapter is about girls, so you boys can skip it. Or if you want to, you can read it all, as I predict you all will. And the second chapter is about boys. So girls, you're about to find out a lot about us as well. So here's the deal, friend. I'm just going to level it with you. All right. You and I have got a lot to learn. In today's episode, I really learned that Evelyn Millis Duvall died on a very strategic day in order to catch my attention so that I would make these videos in order for me to date a girl longer than 22 hours. And so that's what I took out of today's video. I'm sure that you took out something very specific as well. I would encourage you to subscribe below, because not only does it help my channel grow, but it helps you keep in the know about all of the different videos in regards to what Miss Evelyn Millis Duvall has coming up for us. I also want you to comment below if you would rather be in 1957 time or 2021 time, and why. I'm sure there's pros and cons to each, but in regards to the love life and how love operated back then versus now, I would love to hear from you. Other than that, you can follow me on my socials below. Just know you're awesome, and you and I will have a discussion with Miss Evelyn Millis Duvall next time on Love Stories with Grady.